intelligence in young children, what we can learn from that, how we can apply that to what we know about intelligence generally. We're going to get a short introduction, and then she's going to give us 3 sections of this presentation. We're going to have a short little intermission. You guys can stretch your legs, grab some snacks, and if you guys have questions as we're going through the presentation, just save them to the end, and we'll have time for you guys to ask anything that comes up during the presentation. And so with that, okay,
great. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to talk to you today about something I'm quite passionate about. So I'm a second-year graduate student, and I study how kids learn and how they think in the early years of life. So usually I study kids in the preschool years, or between 2 and 5 or so. And today what I want to do, let me just start the screen recording. Let's see. Okay, all right. So, okay. All right, so today what I want to do, however, is to kind of flip that question around a little bit. So instead of asking what do kids know, I want to use that as a case study to kind of reflect upon what have we learned about the human mind and about human intelligence more broadly, okay? And in order to do that, I think the first question we might want to ask is, what do we mean by intelligence? What does this word mean to us? So the one way to think about intelligence is to think about exceptional cases, right? We can all think of really brilliant people or brilliant examples. So maybe we think about inventions and discoveries, for example, in medicine. Perhaps we're going to think about really specific engineering marvels, like our ability to create space shuttles and go into space. Or maybe we think about our ability to use symbols in math and science. Or perhaps we think about chess prodigies who can really plan ahead several moves and try to win these strategic games. And there's several other examples. Maybe you're thinking of creative people who have artistic inventions. They're able to imagine different scenarios and bring that to life. Or maybe we think of great speakers and debaters. So these are all really great examples of maybe intelligence or brilliant minds. And here's a definition from the Oxford Dictionary about what intelligence is. And it says that intelligence is the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. But what I want to say today is actually that intelligence doesn't have to be exceptional. Intelligence is maybe all around us. So let's consider today these questions. What are the basic building blocks of intelligence that enable us to create these amazing achievements as a society, right? What fundamentally allows for these achievements? That is in every one of us, and all of us have the potential to do great things. So before I start the rest of my talk, I want to show you a quick little video. This is a video that they made back in 1944 from Heider and Simmel. So it's a little bit blurry here, but it's an animation with very simple shapes. And what the researchers did was just show this video, it's about a minute long, to students, undergraduates, and they just asked them to describe this video, what was going on. And so that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to play this video for you. And while you're watching it, I'd like you just to think about some words that you can use to describe what's happening. And then I'm going to ask you a few questions at the end, okay? So let's see. Okay, and I'm going to pause and have a little bit of a cliffhanger over here. Okay, so that was about almost a minute of video. And there was no sound, it's just black and white images. But I'm curious to know what kinds of descriptions you might have in your heads about what's going on. Yeah? Sure, either of you. Maybe
that looks like a cell and a virus that was made inside the cell and want to attack the rest of the other kind of cells, like something.
Wow, great. Okay, what about you?
So I think it's more of a fight scene.
A fight scene.
I think this is just me and my like generations because they're so exposed to cartoons and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more of a fight scene and somebody is breaking in out to a villain breaking out.
Okay.
something's happening.
Do you have any sense of who might be the bad guys or who might be the good guys in
Yeah,
this scene?
I think the big triangle is the bad guy
Mhm.
because he keeps hitting, like, well, it seems like he's hitting the little triangle.
Okay, all right. Thanks for that great explanation. Does anyone else have some insights or immediate reactions that they want to share? Sure.
It seems like the rectangle is kind of like a residence of some sort,
Uh-huh.
or like the big triangle that's there or something.
Okay, so maybe it's his house. Some other explanations I've heard people give is maybe the big triangle wasn't so mean. Maybe he was trying to take a nap at home. And then the two little guys came and they were playing and they were maybe a little bit noisy. And that's why he got annoyed. That's another story we might have come up with, right? So to give this example, would you like to share something too?
Was there some kind of defense mechanism?
From the big triangle, you think? Possibly, yeah. So the idea behind this demonstration isn't that there is one right answer or one wrong answer. The idea is that despite showing you just very few information, right, just black and white, you're able to create these rich narratives, right, using words like attack, fight, someone's residence. These aren't things that are labeled for you out there, right? You're making these rich inferences about what might be going on, trying to have explanations that make sense together, right? And I think that's a really impressive ability and demonstration of all of your common sense intelligence, right? Making sense of the world. So I'm gonna move on. So I think from that quick example, we can demonstrate some features or properties of human thought. And one of the really important ones that runs out is that we use abstract concepts. Things like being mean, so emotions. Maybe things like home and residence. Maybe goals. The big guy wanted to attack the little guy, or maybe the little people wanted to play. And so we use these abstract concepts to describe the world. We use them to explain our observations. And we also use these abstract concepts to make predictions about what might happen next. So where I paused the video, I left it where the little circle was inside the room and the big triangle had gone back inside. And you might imagine what's gonna happen next. Maybe they're gonna get into a tussle. Maybe you feel a little worried for the little circle. All right. Now, the other thing is that these abstract concepts are organized. They have some structure. And what that means is you might think that goals and beliefs cause people to act in certain ways. But you don't think that actions cause us to have beliefs or goals. You might also believe that actions depend on what's available in the environment, right? So we can only enter a room if we can open the door. But if there's no door, then we can't really go in it. All right, so these are some properties of human thought. And then we can think about what questions we might have about the nature of intelligence. You know, what does intelligence look like? How can we describe it? So we have several questions. The first one might be, are we born with this knowledge and these abilities to ascribe intentions to other shapes, or and how much of that is really built in? Or we might ask, maybe this knowledge comes with age and experience, right? So we've all lived around the world for many years. We've got experiences with different people. We've seen fights maybe on TV. So if that's learned, then how does learning work? That's a big question as well. We might even ask, do we need language to be intelligent? So earlier I asked you all to describe with words kind of what you thought was happening. Well, what if we're looking at, like, say, animals who can't use words, or babies who don't have words? Can they think about that in the same way? So we can ask this question about similarities and differences between human reasoning and animal reasoning. And finally, there's this bigger question of kind of, even though we have a lot of experience with the world, we often only get a few examples of every idea or concept. How can we make generalizations about the world at large, right? How can we make inferences about groups of people from just observing a few of them, for instance? All right, so here are several big questions that psychologists often try to study. I'm not going to answer every single one of them today because I think we're still going to take decades of work to understand them. But I think we're going to get some clues tonight. All right, and the final thing I want to start with to say is, why study children? Why study babies and kids, right? They're really cute and adorable. Maybe that's a good reason to study them. Well, here are a few more. children seem to learn many things without explicit instruction. Sure, they go to school, we teach them things. But oftentimes, a 2-year-old is learning several hundred words, and we're not always sitting down with them telling them, that's an apple, that's a ball, that's a bear, that's a chair, right? They seem to just absorb things kind of naturally. But on the other hand, kids also often struggle in many situations, whether it's learning to walk, or learning how to form longer sentences, or just learning how to use specific kinds of things out in the world. There are places where they struggle. Now, compared to adults, children also have less experience and less knowledge, but this actually turns out to be a good reason to study kids, because we can look at reasons that they may have learned certain knowledge or skills outside of the world. So we can more closely, I think, look at the mind. And the third reason is, sorry, this is a little crossed out, but the other point was that there are many practical implications for wanting to study children. So whether you're a parent who wants to understand your kid better and how to support them, maybe you're an educator, maybe you teach science or math or language, and you want to understand what do kids already know before they enter the classroom, and how can I make use of that to improve your learning? Maybe you're policymakers who want to know what's the best way that we can design our cities to support these kids. Or maybe recently we've also got people studying computer science or artificial intelligence who want to try to borrow some insights from kids' learning. So there are several reasons there to study children as well. All right, so with all of that kind of ground set, here is the lecture outline for tonight. We're going to start with thinking about how babies think. Is there any intuitive knowledge that even kids in the first year of life already know? The second part, we're going to ask how we might learn like children. Are they actively trying to explore the world and learn about it? And in the third section, we're going to look a little bit at what's next in the field of developmental research. Okay. And then we're going to have the intermission right after the very first section. Okay, any questions before we start? All right, so we'll start with this first section, thinking like baby, what do they already know? In case you haven't met any infants recently, here's a picture of them. So we've got the different ages. We've got a little one at 2 months on the very left, and they're increasing in age all the way to 18 months. And I think the first thing we notice about babies is there's a lot of things that they cannot do, right? Babies cannot walk, they cannot talk, they might not understand what you're saying to them, they might not be able to hold on to objects very much, they kind of, try to grasp a little bit. But on the other hand, there are many things that babies could do. So if you look at this picture of all the babies, they're all doing a few things together. They're sitting, or at least they're resting their heads, and they're also looking out at you all, right? They're paying attention with their senses. So they're looking, they're listening, they're paying attention. And we're going to try to make use of that looking behavior to study what infants know. I'm going to show you a quick video of, this is research done in the 70s on babies, and this is just to give you a sense of what a young infant looks like. And this is, I think, a 4-month-old probably, and what we're going to do is we're just going to observe babies in their natural habitat in their cot. So they're just lying down, staring out into the world, all right? And these researchers are going to try to study what happens when you give them some new experiences. So let's see what happens. All right, I'm going to just say what's happening because the sound isn't quite working. So they just go into the baby's room and they tie a ribbon to the baby's leg, but the ribbon isn't connected to anything. So the baby's just kicking kind of naturally, nothing special is happening. So we're going to measure this base rate of kicking behavior. And then what's happening is you're going to tie the ribbon to the mobile up there. So now when he kicks, it's going to start moving with him. And what's happening is that this baby very quickly figures out that his leg is connected to something. And he's going to start kicking more and more vigorously. And in fact, in this particular video, the baby's kicking twice as many times than when the ribbon wasn't doing anything. Okay. All right, so that's a cute little baby. And what I wanted to say from that is, even though they can't do too much, they are paying a lot of attention to the world. They're noticing the irregularities, they're noticing cause and effect, and they're trying to adjust their actions to maybe get more out of that experience. Okay, so how should we study infants? Well, we can present them different kinds of experiences and see how long they pay attention to it. So let's say we find a toy that babies like, a rubber ducky, right? And we let a baby play with it or look at it. And then we just let them keep playing with it until they're bored and they look away. And then we make them look at the same rubber ducky over and over and over again. I'm gonna call this, well, this is what's happening. If you show the same thing to babies, they're going to get bored, and oftentimes they fall asleep in our laps. This phase I'm gonna call familiarization or habituation. So getting the babies familiar with some kinds of stimulus, and the more toys you show them, the more examples you show them, the less they're gonna find it interesting, right? The less attention they're gonna pay to this. Now, what we can do next is to give them a new stimulus, right? Maybe in this case, I show them a toy train. And then what we can do is measure how much more interested are they now? Have they recovered their attention? So in this case, perhaps you see a baby and he's like, whoa, that's a new toy. That's really cool. I'm gonna look at it. I'm gonna play with it. I'm gonna pay attention to it. So this kind of behavior where infants get habituated if they see the same thing being repeated, and then they recover interest if something new happens. It's a pretty common behavior. You can find it in all animals, even adult humans. If I showed you the same video on loop for many times, you're gonna get bored and look away, right? But if you can detect a novelty, you're gonna recover your interest again. So I'm gonna show you an example to see how babies might be reasoning about objects. So here's a rubber ducky again, and this is what's gonna happen. Okay, I'm gonna just play that one more time. Okay, so hopefully that was pretty normal. Rubber ducky maybe just moving around on this ground. Let's see what happens. What if we add 2 curtains in front of the rubber duck? So let's say we do this. Can you imagine in your heads what might happen next? Okay, hopefully you all can, and I think this is what's gonna happen, right? Does that look pretty normal to you again? Okay, cool. So you have all really good understanding about how objects interact, right? And let's see, what if I show you this event instead? So again, there's gonna be 2 curtains, and I have a rubber ducky, but now this is what you see. Let's see that one more time, just to make sure. What's going on there? Yeah?
Maybe it's dropping down and getting pushed back up.
Ah, so maybe it went down,
And
like
then,
below the
and
black?
then something's pushing it back up the other way so that it stops that.
Okay, so you've got an alternative hypothesis of how this duck is moving. Instead of going straight left and right, it's kind of going down and then coming back up. Maybe that's what's happening. That's very likely. Here's another thing that might be happening. Maybe there were 2 ducks, and one of them was just hidden, right? So maybe one duck went in, and then the other duck started moving, and then they moved separately. So here's another possibility, right? And the reason that you think it wasn't just the same duck moving, either it went down and up, or maybe there were 2 ducks, or maybe some other explanation, is because you have some understanding about objects. And here's what you know about objects. Objects can't just suddenly teleport between 2 walls, right? Objects don't just blink in and out of existence. They must move continuously. Now, the interesting thing is, if you show these events to babies, they're gonna find some more surprising than others. And also, let's say we show them this video, so the kind of surprising video, right? So we show this to them repeatedly until they get bored. And then what happens is we remove the walls, and then you either see 2 things, which make sense, or you see just 1 duck, which doesn't make sense. And you measure how long the babies look. And the babies are gonna look longer at the one that doesn't make sense. And that indicates surprise. They're kind of surprised by something. But if you show them the one that makes sense, they're kind of like, okay, I already saw that, that's okay. I'm gonna look away, nothing new here. All right, so here are some things that you know about objects, and here are all examples of things we've tested in babies. Some as young as 4 months of age. They get surprised if objects don't move on continuous paths, right? They get surprised if objects blink in and out of experience. They get surprised if, let's say, I pick up this bottle and only the top part comes with me. And they also get surprised if they see objects passing through walls. And these are all kind of like, we can do these magic tricks and test what babies know. All right, and so on. And this method has been very widely used. We call it the violation of expectation method, right? So what we're doing is we're trying to design these cool little magic tricks that surprise us. And if we get surprised, we can infer that we must have had some expectations or some knowledge about the world. I'm going to show you one more example of this violation of expectation method. And in this case, it looks a bit like math. So what we're going to do is familiarize babies to a Mickey Mouse toy, and then we're going to cover it up with a screen. So there's one Mickey Mouse toy behind the screen. And then we're going to add a second toy into the screen. And the question is, if we remove the screen now, do you think there's going to be one or two Mickey Mouse toys? What do you think the answer is?
Are you adding it in their view, or you're doing?
Yes, all this is in view. But the view screen is up when the second one is added. Okay, so the answer should be 2, right? 1 plus 1 is 2. That's pretty basic for us. Now what we're going to do is show this to babies and see what happens. Are they going to be surprised to see one object, or are they going to be pretty happy either way? All right, so I've got this cute video on YouTube. And this is a particularly excited baby, so it's very fun to see what happens. All right, let me get the YouTube video up. Okay, I'm just going to move this video to the correct screen. All right, so that's a baby. And I want you to hear the sound on this one. So I'm going to try playing it from my laptop. All right.
It's well known that babies tend to look longer at things that they find surprising or unexpected. So we can show them little arithmetical situations, if you will, little magic shows in which babies see some number of objects being added to some other number. And by sneakiness on the part of the experimenter, we can either make the outcome be the correct outcome or an incorrect outcome.
2 minus 1 equals 1. This 10-month-old is bored and looks away after only a few seconds.
Where's he going?
But when things don't add up,
Goes the screen.
1
What's this?
plus 1
Where's he going?
equals 1.
So that music.
And the baby seems surprised.
Okay. All right, so that was a really dramatic baby. It's great when we get examples like that, but sorry why I did video of that. But across the board, if you test lots of different babies and you show some of them the surprising thing and you show some of them the not surprising thing, you can kind of compare this behavior, right? At the very end of the day, are most babies looking longer at the surprising thing? And it turns out that they do. So in this example with 1 plus 1, they've also tested things like 2 minus 1, or 2 plus 1, or 1 minus 1. So all kinds of combinations just to try to figure it out. And it turns out that that was a 10-month-old who could kind of understand this. We can test this on 4-month-olds, and they kind of also show the same kinds of behavior. So that's pretty interesting. This is an example of early, maybe numerical reasoning. And in general, developmental psychologists have basically tried to invent these really clever puppet shows or magic tricks to try to test exactly what infants know. And it's great because we don't have to ask them in words, right? We don't have to ask them 1 plus 1. We can just kind of show them these events. All right. Now, more generally, by using lots of these magic tricks, we can ask, what else do kids know about the world? And the more that we probe, the more that we find that babies, just like adults, seem to understand the world through some intuitive theories. So just like scientific theories, which are used to describe the world, to make explanations and to make predictions, all of us seem to have these common sense theories of how the world acts, whether that's about objects. So we have something we might call intuitive physics. We know how objects move, we know how forces affect objects, and we can use that to predict how they will move. We might also have something called intuitive psychology, in which we understand the psychology of other people as having beliefs, as having preferences and desires, and we can kind of understand how all of those contribute to cause people to act in certain ways. We might also start asking about intuitive sociology. So how do we identify who belongs to which groups? How do we identify how people of the same group will interact versus people of different groups? We might ask also how we make inferences about who's more powerful or less powerful, or what are the social norms that different groups must obey. We might even look at intuitive morality. So you can show babies helpful versus not helpful methods. You could show them good versus bad methods, almost like the very first video I showed you, and try to ask what expectations you infants have. So this has been a really productive way of thinking about knowledge in young children. I'm going to show you one more example about intuitive psychology. So we can look at whether babies reason about agents' actions. So here's an example. During the familiarization or habituation trials, I'm just going to have two toys, a teddy bear and a ball, and they're all really interesting to kids. What's going to happen is I'm going to show a human hand reaching for, in this case, the teddy bear. And we're going to show this repeatedly. Keep reaching for the teddy bear, right, until the kids are bored. At the test trial, we're going to have two kinds of trials. So we make sure the baby's bored, and then we show them the new event. So in one version, we're going to switch the toys around to different locations, but the hand's going to reach in the same place. Now that is the same path of action, but a different object, right? It's a new goal. It's the ball now. In another group of babies, we're going to show them this. So we also switch the ball and the bear locations, but the hand continues to reach for the bear. But now it's a different location, right? So both of these cases are different than what the babies were familiarized to, but we're going to ask which of these is more surprising. So I don't know if we have a gut reaction about which one you expect the hand to reach for. Do people want to guess? Who thinks that the hand should reach for the ball on the same side? Okay, and who thinks maybe the hand should reach for the bear? Now it's on a different side. Okay, so we have some mixed reactions. So it turns out that what babies do, these were 11-month-olds, is that they get surprised if the hand reaches for a new goal. But they're not surprised to see the hand reach for the same goal, even though it's in a new location. So what does this tell us? It tells us that kids at 11 months, or maybe earlier, have some expectations that people have maybe consistent preferences that are stable across time. We always like to reach for the same kinds of objects, and we expect goals to control action, not just the physical directions. Now, researchers have tried this with a different technique. Instead of using a human hand, they're going to use a mechanical claw. So it's just like a toy, kind of like a robot hand. And they're going to do the exact same test, right? Is the robot hand going to reach for the same object or for the same side? And in this case, babies are surprised by both events. What is that? Well, because in both cases, something has changed, right? So this tells us that these infants are only attributing goals to animate agents, or things like people who they expect to be able to have preferences, right? Robot hands can't really have preferences. Now, as we continue to look at these examples, I've shown you 3 examples so far. It looks like we have knowledge about objects, we have knowledge maybe about numbers, and maybe we have some knowledge about agents and actions. And we can call these different systems of knowledge. And we've looked at a few other ones. So I won't go into them in detail, but one that we've looked at is social reasoning. So do we also have a system of knowledge that's about social groups and how people interact? And here's another system that's about geometry. It looks like even very young infants have ideas about distances and maybe angles or directions. Now, we call these, one hypothesis is that we call this a system of core knowledge. So these 5 kind of separate abilities, think about specific kinds of things in the world. And we think that they're distinct, kind of like how you have different sense organs, right? So you've got eyes that take in light and produce images, and you've got ears that take in sound waves, but your eyes cannot see sound, and your ears cannot hear light, right? They're kind of separate. So we think also that these systems are quite separate. They take in dedicated kinds of information and tell you dedicated things about the world. But eventually they do have to combine, right? Eventually we kind of combine all of this information together. All right. Now, these systems of core knowledge have been studied across the world, across different ages, and we find that they're pretty universal. Even if we go into remote cultures where they speak different languages and have very different experiences of the world, they also show the same 5 distinct abilities. So no matter the language you test them in, you get these abilities. In fact, you find the same abilities in other animals. So here's a bonobo, and bonobos have demonstrated really great abilities to use tools. So they're using a stick in this case. Now, it's not just our closest related animals. There's recent work showing that bees have understandings about number, kind of like the Mickey Mouse study I showed you. They can kind of make comparisons between, 1 versus 3 and other abilities as well. So what does this tell us? It tells us that at least these 5 perhaps systems of core knowledge might be evolutionarily ancient and shared across the board. And that seems to be surprising on one hand. How could it be that we all figured this out? But on the other hand, it's not so surprising if you consider that we all live in the same world. We live in a world where objects don't just disappear. We live in a world where objects can't pass through walls. So it seems to make sense that some of these abilities might be built into us. Okay. So just to summarize this very first section, thinking like a baby, what kinds of intuitive knowledge do we have? I've showed you that doing careful experimental tests can reveal early knowledge in infancy. So one example I showed you was to rely on what they find surprising. Much of the knowledge that we have about the world can be structured in terms of intuitive theories that support prediction and explanation, and it represents causal relations between these abstract concepts like beliefs, desires, maybe even gravity. And finally, it looks like infants begin with a specialized set of core knowledge systems that might be the foundation for later intuitive theories that build upon these early ideas. Okay, so at this point, I'm happy to take questions. We'll have a 5-minute break until about 7:40. So feel free to go take a break or ask any questions or comments that you might have.
Yeah, so I noticed the surprise baby picture, obviously was an illustration,
Mm-hmm.
but the video, the one child appeared to be more kind of trying to figure out what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And almost like a suspicious look on her face.
Yeah.
But I was curious if there's a point in development where the orienting reflex is differentiated from startle reflex, or if there's just a unitary, like, what is this reflex that then changes. And I guess related to that, are you able to determine the strength of those reasoning systems based on, are you able to qualitatively or to I guess describe levels to how strong their understanding of concepts is?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there were 2 really great questions there. First, let me just comment on your great observation. How do you tell that a baby who looks longer is really surprised or trying to figure it out, or just kind of startled and like in shock? And we don't specifically know because we can't ask them directly, right? But what you can do is, I'll show you actually one example later on in which it really does suggest that they're doing information seeking. They're surprised and they're paying more attention because it really is capturing their attention. And so later on, I'll highlight an example in which they're really doing that. Now, the second question that you had, I believe, was more about differentiating more fine-grained differences in babies' understanding. And we are able to do that. You can do that maybe by looking at different ages. So in very early studies of physics, let's see if I can give you an example here. So let's say I put this object and I try to balance it. That looks okay, right? It's not falling. And I can put it here where there's no support and you should expect it to fall, right? Now what we can start to do is, what if I do it like right over here? It should fall too, right? And it does fall. What if I put it over here? So it's still touching the bottle, but it's not really supported, and it should fall as well. But it turns out that infants seem to go through these different stages of reasoning. So initially, they seem to think that as long as you're touching, no matter how, it should stay in place. And then later on, they seem to think as long as you're touching from the bottom, it'll stay in place. So they think this is okay. And then a few months later, they start to think, oh, it has to be a bit more careful about maybe the center of gravity and so on. So there does seem to be gradual changes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so maybe we can take a short intermission. Let's be back at 7:42. Yes, that's
Sorry, you look like you had a hand up. Yeah.
Is very much the same interaction if it's a boy with a girl.
Mm-hmm.
Are very similar, or
Yeah, they are.
at that age it's very similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, it's hard to tell very strong gender differences. Usually, these differences start to show up more in social situations. Yeah, but for these kind of almost more like common sense, like everybody has it, you don't really see gender differences.
Are we talking things versus people?
No, the boy and girls, because well, maybe I'm wrong, but I always had the idea that like a woman, they have like this like a verbal skills to learn a lot of language very easy. When men is a struggle more with that, do you know?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we have very good evidence for that difference. It may be that more social cultural factors are in play.
Oh, okay.
But you can always find, boys who can learn a lot of languages or girls who are very good at math or spatial reasoning. So it's not clear that there is a real difference. Yeah, but if you're interested, there is this really cool debate on YouTube by Professor Liz Felke of Harvard and Steven Pinker of Harvard, where they argue about gender differences. So if you're curious, I can show you the link at the end of tonight, or you can make a Google search for that.
Yeah, kind of on that topic, actually, I was curious. So I was shown some studies. It wouldn't seem to contradict the idea that the systems, I guess, or the types of relations are different, but they were arguing that, and they showed some videos and stuff, but they were arguing that in different cultures, at least, whether or not it's racial or cultural or whatever, that different children would group things differently. So they said in like Western cultures, like US, UK, that children would group things like a bee, a dragonfly, and a flower. And so, and supposedly in Western cultures, they would group them because like, oh, they're flying insects, the bee and the dragonfly together. And East Asian cultures, it would be the bee and the flower go together because they have a relationship.
I see.
And I was curious if you had a take on that, or if you had seen that at all, or if you think that's realistic. Or I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, I would trust the data, but I would be curious what kinds of explanations were being offered and if there are ways to test those specific explanations. So it's reasonable to think that we have different, slightly different biases or preferences for ways of looking at the world that might be due to the kind of cultures that we have. To me, I'm more interested in the fact that we're able to learn those biases from our culture, right? And the fact that the same baby, if you let them grow in one kind of culture versus another, might have different proclivities. For these examples, again, these are in very early infants, before 12 months old, so I think you would find these pretty universal. You're not going to find that culture affects whether we think objects pass through walls or not.
Well, then the question is it a cultural thing, or is it a deeper racial thing or something like that? Like with these ones here, do their styles of grouping within the systems all tend to match? Do they tend to group things like in the same ways?
These, at least the examples I've talked about, core knowledge, are consistent and pretty universal, and there's very good evidence for that across cultures, across racial or ethnic groups, across languages, and so on.
Cool.
Yeah.
I just actually came from I was going to ask later to see if you got into it, but are you familiar with Ian McGilchrist? He did a book, The Master and His Emissary. So there was just I just came from a documentary about that. And he's arguing that left brain. He argues for laterality of thinking functions corresponding to organization and society. And then he sort of got this other thesis that we're too left-brained, it's too reductionist, we need to be in nature and stuff like that. So in that they had video. So I literally just saw it. So I don't know whether what they showed the kids giving it, well, why do you think that is, or why do you group them that way? And the kids sort of offer an explanation. But beyond that, I don't know anything. I was just curious if you'd come across that at all.
Not specifically as related. I do think we don't even know enough about the brain to say something is even left brain or right brain. Even something that language is one of the things that people seem to think is more in one part of the brain, but we have evidence that it's really kind of all over. So I think there's just a lot of open questions, and those are interesting hypotheses.
And in the documentary, they had people like, this is the best thing ever, and other people like, this is so stupid, and then they had that guy and then two professors on stage, kind of talking, and they were all arguing with each other. So it's,
I think those debates are where it's really interesting, and
Yeah,
I'm curious
yeah,
what the
absolutely.
new things are. Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. That's good. Yeah. Okay. So just turn this on again. Okay.
Okay, thanks everyone. We're going to get started again for the second half. I just wanted to quickly point out that outside the door we have a couple of feedback forms, so you can jot down any notes for our speaker to help her improve, as well as suggestions for future lecture topics. So we really do take these suggestions into account when we're choosing our speakers. So if there's a topic you want to learn about, jot it down and we'll try to incorporate it into the next round. So thanks everyone.
Yeah, and I would really appreciate any comments or questions you may have about this. Also, feel free to jump in with questions throughout each section as well. I like having this more interactive style, so feel free to just raise your hand if you have some thought that comes to mind. Okay, so we're gonna get back to this, and I'm gonna just put up a reminder of what the Oxford Dictionary called intelligence, right? So they define it as the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. So what have we learned so far is, we seem to be starting off with some knowledge and skills, right? And maybe that enables the later acquisition of more knowledge. Okay, so now we're going to go into the second part of this lecture about learning like a child. How do they inquire and make discoveries about the world in kind of active ways? So hopefully we all believe that babies and children are quite inquisitive. They're quite curious and they want to learn about the world. Right, so here's the little infant who's kind of reaching out, figuring out what buttons do to their toys. Now, if you were trying to be a young investigator going out into the world to learn new things, you're going to have a lot of questions that you need to figure out. And some of these questions might be, when should I explore? That's kind of costly, it's tiring. You have to go out and press buttons and ask questions. So when should you do that? Also, what should you explore? The world is large. There are many different kinds of things you might be doing. So what choices do you make about what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to? You might also ask questions like, now that I've decided to go study this thing, what kinds of ideas and hypotheses should I even consider? How can I learn if I only get a few opportunities to play with this toy? You might also ask about social questions such as, should I ask for help? Babies, young children, often need help to do a lot of things. Should they ask for it or should they try to do it on their own? Also, who should they trust, right? A lot of times we get information from other people and out in the world, but maybe we shouldn't just trust anybody that tells us something, right? We can ask whether infants and young children also have sensitivities to these kinds of questions. All right, so I'm gonna look at the first question first. When should we explore and what should we explore? And this is gonna be relevant to the earlier question about, is looking at a surprising thing just shock, or is it actually gathering information? Okay, so here I'm going to show you two examples of surprising events. So let's look at the first one. We already know that surprise attracts attention, so let's just show you the specific examples here. This is one example. Whoa, that's pretty cool, huh? Okay, so that's surprising. And it violates gravity, right? So I'm going to call it violating the belief that objects should fall without support. That's a violation. Let's show you another violation. Okay, so that's another surprising thing. And I'm going to call that violating the belief that objects are solid. Maybe that wall isn't really solid. Maybe it's just a picture or something. Okay, so we can show one group of babies this violation about support, and we can show another group of babies the violation about solidity. And let's see what happens next. Okay, we're going to see whether the kind of event that was surprising to them affects what they do next with these toys. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to let them watch the event. Let's say we show babies this truck event, and we're going to let them have a truck to play with. We're going to see what they do. So maybe babies are going to do a lot of things. They might start to lick it. They might start to throw it around and stuff. But we're interested in two specific behaviors. One of them is dropping the toy, and the other action is banging the toy. So if you see this event whereby the toy truck seems to be floating in midair, well then it seems reasonable to try to drop it and see whether it still floats when you let go of it. right? That's able to give you information about support. Now, on the other hand, if you saw that event where the ball was rolling through the wall, you might start to bang the ball on the table and see if it's going to go through another object, right? So these are two very different kinds of behaviors that seem to give us different kinds of information about the toys. And our question is, do babies do these behaviors differently depending on which event they saw? We're going to look at one group of babies first. So here's a graph of babies who saw this truck event. And the red graph shows babies who saw the surprising truck event, and they turn out to do a lot of dropping behaviors. Give them the truck, they try to drop it. They don't really bang it or do other stuff, they try to drop it. On the other hand, in the blue graph, those are babies who saw a similar event, but in that case, the truck kind of stopped before it got off, so it wasn't surprising. So if you just saw a normal kind of truck moving event, they don't really drop it or bang it. Now, what about the other group of kids who saw the ball rolling through the wall? Well, in the group in red, it turns out that if they saw that surprising event, they're going to try to bang the ball to try to get information about, is this really solid or not, right? And again, if you show them a very similar video, but the ball stops at the first wall, so it's not surprising, that's the graph in blue. They kind of just in the middle as well. So not especially banging it, not especially dropping it. Yeah, a question.
This might be kind of a dumb question, but in this study, how do they kind of distinguish? Because you could also maybe like drop a ball on a table to see if the ball is stopped by the table, and doesn't that sort of like couldn't that count also as like hypothesis testing behavior of like the solidity of those things?
So you're saying like if I dropped it from a really high place, it's both gonna fall and also hit the table.
Yeah, but I mean maybe like go through the table maybe, right? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, so maybe we can test like two ideas at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in this, the general answer is what we do is we show undergraduate students or other researchers videos of these babies, and we ask them to make their best judgment. And then we let multiple people make these judgments and see what's consistent across the board. And usually these are pretty consistent, like 95% of the time everyone says the same thing, and then maybe there's one or two cases where it's a bit less obvious. Yeah. And here we're showing kind of like the relative behaviors. So maybe someone might decide to call that both banging and dropping, and they would be like in the middle. Yeah, that's a good question.
And presumably those are the error bars then, is that where there's maybe a disagreement on what the type of behavior is?
So for this specific graph, the error bars are, each individual is represented once on this graph only. So error bars are about between children variability. Okay, so some children drop a little bit, and some people drop a lot. That's kind of what those lines are showing. But the general pattern is that, surprise does attract attention, but it also leads to further information-seeking behavior that's really targeted at the kind of surprise that they got, okay? All right, so it looks like infants explore when something is surprising or confusing, and they have a chance to get more knowledge. And what's surprising, of course, depends on what you already know about the world. In addition, infants seem to explore in ways that maximize the information they might get, right? So if you hear something surprising, you might ask a question about that, but not about something irrelevant. Okay, let's look at the second question now. What kinds of hypotheses should I consider? Are we able to learn things from very few examples? And here's kind of a thought experiment I want you to consider. Let's say you walk into a room with thousands of brown boxes. Here are just 4 of them. And let's say you reach into one bag and just pull out something at random. You can't see what's inside, okay? So here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna pull out an object and, you get 4 of the same things. You get 4 blue balls. Okay, well, let's try the second bag and see what happens. And you do the same thing. You kind of just look and you take things out and you're like, okay, 4 red marbles. All right, let's try the third box. Okay, and there are 4 green marbles that come out of this box. All right, now the question is, what do you think is going to come out of the last box?
Probably something like supposed to be for another color blue or something, but it's probably something different.
Okay, yeah, so you're kind of thinking in the mindset of like the researcher, right? What can we do to try to trick the babies? Yeah, okay. But if you were thinking what would not trick the babies, then you're saying, maybe something a different color, but they would all maybe look the same, right? Or maybe they would all be circles. So maybe you might do this. That would be okay. That'd be pretty consistent. Maybe you would get that, 2 purple balls. That would also be consistent, not very surprising. Now, what if I showed you that, we got a yellow circle and a yellow triangle? I wrote because it's a little bit maybe, but it's also not impossible, right? I haven't really taken everything out of the bag. It's possible. And what if I show you this? That's a little bit more surprising. I put a no because I think intuitively we feel that that's a bit unexpected, right? Do you feel the same kind of differences? Yeah, okay. So why is that? I haven't told you what's inside the bags. I've only shown you 12 examples so far, right? I haven't really given you proof of what's in these bags. And what it looks like is that you might have uncertainty about specific details, like what color the objects might be, but you are quite certain about other abstract rules and regularities. Like you're pretty sure it's going to be circles, and you're pretty sure they're all going to be the same color, even if you don't know what the color is. So we're going to call those kinds of expectations over hypotheses. And these are hypotheses about hypotheses. Okay, they're kind of these larger abstract expectations about the kinds of possibilities that we should consider. And these over hypotheses are going to help us learn from sparse evidence, even when we have just a few examples. So these over hypotheses are things like, we expect things to have this shape, we expect these patterns to continue. All right, so researchers have tested this in 2010 with infants, and they showed the same thing to 11-month-old infants, and they measured again surprisal. And we see pretty graded surprisal, kind of like how you were suggesting, how can I trick these babies, right? And so the babies did get tricked, depending on what we showed them. Now we can use these over hypotheses in other domains. So I'm going to show you an example from word learning. We're going to show this to 3-year-olds. So what we're going to do is get some toys or pictures. So I've got a picture here, and I say, see, a dax. That's a dax. That's a novel made-up word, and we just want to see how kids are learning it, okay? So to test what kids are learning about what a dax means, we give them a couple other toys, and we say, hey, can you pick out the other daxes? Show me all the other daxes. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to point to each one of them in turn, and I want you to say yes if it's a dax, and no if you don't think it's a dax, okay? If you're not sure, just say maybe. All right, so we're going to start that one.
Yes.
All right. This one.
Yes.
Okay.
No. Yes.
Okay.
No, yes.
No, maybe yes. All right. Okay. Let's try the last two. This one.
No.
No. Okay. Very confident. What about the last one? No. Maybe. Okay. All right. So you got less and less certain, right? You went from definitely yes to definitely no. Okay. Let's see. So the 3 and 4-year-olds in the study were picking mostly around there. So they would say, I think in this study, like 95% of the 3 and 4-year-olds picked those two, and then maybe half of them would pick one of the other dogs. Okay, now let's try another game. What if I give you 3 examples? That was just learning from one example. I'm going to give you 3 now. I'm going to say, see a dax, another dax, another dax. All right, and now let's play the same game. Pick out the other daxes, okay? Give me all the daxes that you see. So let's try that.
Yes.
Yes, okay, very confident. No, okay. So that was less than before? No. All right, so with just 2 more examples, you really changed your minds about this, huh? Okay. What does that tell us? Well, the kids also do the same thing. They end up picking those 2, actually. So they pick the other Dalmatian a little more frequently than the adults are doing. But this tells us that the kinds of generalizations that we make depend on the amount of evidence we get, right? The more evidence we have for an idea, the more we believe it, and the more restricted our generalizations are. We think that is really only about that one thing. Now we can play this game in many different ways. Let's say we give these 3 examples, and I say that's a dax, that's a dax, and that's a dax. And now what the 3 and 4-year-olds are going to do is they're going to pick all the dogs, right? Even the ones that weren't mentioned. Now that tells us that generalizations depend on the variability of evidence. So again, it's 3 examples, but they're 3 different dogs. So then you start to learn, oh, maybe it's about this category, right? Maybe it's this group of things. All right, one last condition that they tried, they got out these 3 toys and they said, that's a dax, that's a dax, that's also a dax. Now what do you choose? All of them, that's right. And that's what the 3 and 4-year-olds are doing as well. They're picking all the animals. So from this, we know that generalizations depend on the structure of your prior knowledge, right? But what do I mean by structure? I mean this. You can put all these animals on a line, and how do you understand these things? Well, you might draw this. We've got Dalmatians, we've got dogs, and then we've got this even larger category of all animals. And in this specific study, actually, they asked kids to choose between 27 different toys. So they also had trucks and planes, and they had apples and bananas and other examples. And the idea is that, we seem to understand objects in the world with their labels, but there's this hierarchy, these levels of understanding categories. And these categories are what allows us to make different kinds of generalizations. Okay. I'll show you one more example of learning rules from patterns. And here's a game that you can play with a 4 or 5-year-old. And I've done this with hundreds of them. So we're going to play a counting game. Just get a 4-year-old and ask them, hey, can you count for me? Start from 1 and go as high as you can until you can't go anymore. And kids like to play this for some reason. They like to do this. So in English, they might do 1, 2, 3, they get to 9 or 10. And it seems that when kids are learning these first few words for numbers, they are kind of learning it like the alphabet. They kind of just memorize the list and recite it out for you. But maybe they start counting higher, and then they start recognizing a pattern. 51, 52, 53, 61, 62, 63. So what's the pattern here? The pattern here isn't about dogs and animals. What's the pattern here?
That they at the end of each number, they have the same number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's kind of like this. I've got it in blue and black. I don't know if you can see it, but we've got words like 1 to 9, and they keep repeating, right? But every 10 numbers, we're going to change the very first word. So we're going to say 50s, and we're going to say 60s, and 70s, and so on, right? So this is a game you might try with kids. Ask them to count, and when they stop, let's say they get to 69, and they're like, I don't know what comes next. Like, I haven't learned it that far. To test if they've figured out this rule, you can tell them 70 comes next. And see, are they going to say 71, or are they going to just be like, I don't know what comes next? So if they know the rule, they might continue. And so here's one continuation that I got from a 5-year-old. When I asked him to keep counting, he said, infinity 1, infinity 2. Right. So sometimes maybe these generalizations aren't the most accurate, but they do make sense, right? They're really revealing this kind of logical reasoning, very powerful mechanisms of learning. All right. Now this, we can call inductive inference, if you've ever heard that word. Sometimes people learn about it in math tests. It just means using examples to make predictions about what happens next, noticing these regularities. All right. And for inductive inference, the more examples you know, the more likely you are to know what comes next. All right, so we talked about 2 kinds of questions. And for the second question, it looks like people are using over hypothesis about what's likely. So that was the marbles example. Very few examples, and yet you have expectations at a higher level. And again, these kinds of inferences and over hypotheses depend on the way your knowledge is organized and the kinds of variability that you get in the examples. So that was a dog kind of game. All right, so now we're on to our very last part for this section. Who should I learn from? Lots of people to learn from in the world. Lots of people to ask questions to. Which answers should we trust? So here's a game, again, for 3 and 4-year-olds. We're going to have somebody in a green shirt, somebody in a purple shirt. And what we're going to do is just give them some objects and ask them what they're called. So here are some 4 everyday objects that 3 and 4-year-olds seem to know the words for. So here are the 4 of them. And you ask the green person, can you tell me what these are called? And here's what they say. That's a bowl, that's a shovel, that's a cookie, that's a shoe. They kind of know some things, but not always, right? They got one mistake. Okay, let's ask the purple person and see what they say. They say lion, clock, dog, truck. Okay, really inaccurate here, right? Who should you trust? Who seems more knowledgeable? The green one. Yeah, okay. How are we going to test it? Well, we're going to ask them to label a novel object. That's a funny thing we've never seen before. We don't really know the word for it. The green person says, that's a dax. Same word as the previous study, but unrelated. So that's a dax. And then a purple person says, I think that's a lug. Then the question is, who should you trust? So let's get a 3-year-old and ask them, hey, what do you think that's called? Should they say DAX or what? They should say DAX, right? That's more likely to be accurate. So here's data from 3 and 4-year-olds. If you ask 3-year-olds to do this, half of them say DAX and half of them say look. But if you ask the 4-year-olds, in this case, 80% of them say DAX and 20% of them say look.
How do you, what if a 3-year-old doesn't know what all of the things are? Like, what if they don't know, what if they don't have, like, the right answers in their head?
Right, so if they don't even realize that they're being wrong because they don't know what the right answer is anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in this case, you can pre-test, you can ask the parents to fill out a survey, like, does your kid know about these words? And you only use the ones that the child actually knows.
And do you think that contributes to, like, the effect of, like, going from 3 years old to 4 years old?
That is possible, but in this particular study, like I said, we can control for prior knowledge, and then you can also ask the kids an additional question, who was more accurate, and see if that makes sense. So they should be picking, so the 3-year-olds actually are mostly saying the green guy is more accurate.
So you're wearing purple. Does that mean you are the one that lies to children just constantly, or is that someone else?
Yeah, so
Do you rotate that around?
Yeah, we do rotate around. Your observation. So yeah, I mean, in my day job, I'm on the business of tricking children and seeing what they know and figure out, right? But yeah, we do balance it. That's an important thing we do. We always switch out who's green, who's purple, who's getting it right, who's getting it wrong, which object is being labeled wrong, what are the words that are being used, who says DAX, who says lug. All of those things are
That was a
recognized.
joke, but I have a serious question actually. Are there any biases in terms of, do you ever see in terms of age, gender, any other characteristics besides, like, does it ever vary from this pattern of who knows more or who's more truthful?
So let me just clarify your question. Is it about other factors apart from past accuracy that affects kids' decisions, or is it about within the specific context of the accuracy?
Yeah, does it always hold that they go by this, roughly?
Yes. So accuracy is a reliable factor if we decide to test.
When do children or infants first show signs of distrust? Or when is trust even a concept?
Well, it depends on what you define as trust, and you can do it in different ways. You might trust somebody in terms of what they label objects as, but you might not trust their decisions in another context, right? So there might be a difference between domains that you trust in. I don't know the specific answer. Similar studies like this have been done in 2-year-olds recently. There are also studies, this isn't directly trust, but it's more like, who would you rather play with? Yeah, so that's a bit different than trust, but it's still a matter of social engagement and social interaction. Yeah, but I think that's a great question. I don't think we really know the answer to that. Yeah, a lot of the trust work has been done in the context of word learning, kind of like selective decisions to learn a label from somebody. Yeah.
To build off your question, could you say that trust, like, not necessarily like when it starts, but it's like it comes with like what the child has as prior knowledge, because if the child knows that object to be a shoe as like a true thing, and the green person is saying the same thing, then they're gonna obviously agree with them because they share the same prior knowledge.
Yeah.
So couldn't you kind of like equate those two things? And, like,
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you're actually reminding me of this other study where instead of just looking at accuracy, they looked at maybe like the language they speak. So if someone speaks the same language as you, you're going to trust them in terms of word learning a little bit more than someone who speaks a different language. And that seems to make sense because you want to learn words from someone who speaks your own language. But they had this other study, I think, where one of the people just had more times to play with the kids previously. So they had like a positive prior experience. And these kind of social factors are also going to affect who you decide to trust. And they seem to affect even decisions about word learning. So trust seems to have a lot of different dimensions to it. Yeah.
Were there any children that answered their own word?
Yeah. Yeah, there were. In this one, I'm sorry, I don't know the specific answer. I can pull it up after the lecture if you want to know. But in this picture, this graph, we're only including the kids who either said DAX or lug. Yeah.
But I mean, going off of that, was it usually like, so that they just completely made up themselves, or was it maybe like they averaged the two words and they were like, it's a dud?
It's a duck. Those are all really great questions, and I'm sorry that I don't have the very specific answers, but I'd be really happy to find out and tell you right after this lecture. Great questions. Do we have another one in the back? Yeah.
Was there any study on some kind of feedback where someone gave them an arbitrary word, but there was no alternative to choose? For example, if they just met the purple person, would they study something like that where they maybe react in a certain way or don't react or just believe it?
Yeah. I don't know anything that's specifically done that. I can tell you an almost unrelated, but it's a bit tied to your question. So there was one study about children's tendencies to ascribe norms of behavior, right? So the question is, maybe if you hear just one person say that's a dex, are you going to just believe it because you just think, we should just follow whoever said anything? So what they did was to have this cool toy, and one adult came in the room and they played with it a certain way. Like maybe they pressed it a number of times or they pulled a certain lever. And then they left the room. A new adult came in and they played with the toy a different way. So then they asked whether 3-year-olds would spontaneously react to that difference in how they were interacting with that toy. And in these studies, they find that 3-year-olds were spontaneously protesting. They were like, no, you can't do that. That's not how you play with this toy. This is how you should play with the toy, even though they've only seen one example of that. So that's not about word learning, but in certain cases, there does seem to be examples where kids are kind of just taking it for granted, some kind of demonstration, and thinking that that's just how things should be done. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With the 3-year-olds being like 50% on each side, does it kind of make it like, like almost like pointless? Like, would it be the same for 1-year-olds because it's like 50% chance of each?
Yeah. So usually if we get this kind of results, we're gonna start diving into like what are the 3-year-olds doing and what kinds of information are they considering instead of going younger. I'm gonna show you the next slide, however, that helps us answer this question of what the 3-year-olds are doing. So in this case, we're gonna have the green person be 100% correct, and the purple person is gonna be 100% wrong. In this case, the 3-year-olds are pretty rational. So don't go home thinking 3-year-olds can't make these decisions, right? They do make these decisions in certain cases. And the particular difference, if we compare this slide and this previous slide, here, both of them made a mistake. So maybe what's happening is the 3-year-olds are thinking, well, they were both wrong, so it's moot, it's whatever. They both made a mistake. Whereas the 4-year-olds seem to be carefully weighing exactly how many mistakes are going on. But in the case where one person's always correct, there are no mistakes, they seem to be sensitive to that. No mistakes is better than any mistake. Okay? So you can do a lot of different manipulations and ask these specific questions. All right. So to summarize, in the second section about acts of inquiry, we've learned that preschoolers and younger infants learn through exploration. So these seem to be in many ways similar to how maybe scientists are conducting investigations in terms of the ways that govern these behaviors. So for instance, they selectively explore when things are surprising and less so when things are not surprising. Depending on what prior knowledge they have, they might start forming these over-hypotheses about the kinds of possibilities that they should entertain. And they also seem to be sensitive to the bias and prior accuracy of the source of information, whether it's a person or just the examples of labeling different objects. All right. Any questions here before I move on to the third and final section?
Another question. So in the first section, you were talking about how the kids or the babies, they were looking into something, putting attention to something, how they get bored, and how something changed in the environment, surprising, so the babies again put attention on that. So my question is, trying to see, we were babies at some time, ourselves, right? So is there you can give us an example if, for example, let's say YouTube or Facebook or Fortnite, it just, they make money keeping us interested in what they do, Facebook, YouTube, and Fortnite. So we have, does they use some kind of this keep more captive customers to them, because I know that YouTube in the algorithm, they have these conspiracy theories. Every time you were searching for something, and time to time they will certain conspiracy theories, and that is like surprising, because you are looking videos about the same, and then you have something different. Maybe people we're clicking a lot of that, but I don't know if you have an example of that kind of situation.
Yeah, so there are many different comments made in that. Let me try to unpack that. I think, yes, they are using the science of attention and the science of what keeps us engaged to try to kind of affect the ways in which we do pay attention and spend time on those platforms. For a specific example about, let's see. So could you maybe clarify the example that you are hoping to find out about? So like beyond kind of how social media has tried to use these kinds of information, or?
No, I was wondering if you are aware of any kind of Facebook or YouTube or format they do. So when they realize people is getting bored or they are not so interested, they turn on something or switch something that you can say, oh, they are doing this, so people get again engaged on that kind of consume.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So I don't know too much about the specifics of these algorithms that they use, but I do think yes, they do highlight novel information, right? They highlight information that's perhaps shared among our friends because that's likely to get our attention too. Maybe thinking about trust and similarities. In some cases, it may have these negative consequences of keeping us engaged when we really should be doing something else with our lives. But in certain cases, it might also be useful, I think. So like if you do a Google search, right? If it tracks what you've been searching about in the past, then maybe it's trying to give you more relevant information that's related to what you might already know. And that's kind of similar to how like during learning, we are affected by what we have previously believed, right? If we didn't find specific kinds of things surprising, or if we didn't know anything about, say, magnetism or some other new idea, then there's nothing that's affecting what we think next. There's also ways in which, instead of just giving us novel information, people are also really attracted to people with the same ideas as them, right? So it's possible to create these kinds of bubbles. Yeah, echo chambers, maybe that's a kind of a phrase people have used. So there, I think it's really interesting to look and study those mechanisms of belief, right? What kinds of things do we accept and endorse and believe in? And then what kinds of evidence does it take to overturn those beliefs, right? Today, what I've shown you is kind of the learning side of things, right? As we get new information, how are we going to try to incorporate that into what we already know? And how does what we already know shape whether we take on and how that change happens? But of course, there's this other question that is, do we even pay attention to that new piece of knowledge if it's conflicting with what I already know? And there might be kind of a gradient in that, right? So maybe if it's a little bit different, you're like, okay, I can kind of accept that. If it's too different, maybe you're like, I don't want to think about that until I figure it out. But if you have a lot of conflicting evidence, this happens in science too, right? Theories change when we have a lot of conflicts. And then we have to really make a new story that includes everything. So I think there's a lot of different reasons at play and different factors. I don't know specifically how to really study that, but I think there are open questions that's worth investigating. Yeah, thank you.
So quick question, just something that you made me think of. On the experiment where you were kind of testing if kids were trusting like the green person or the purple person, was there maybe something related to that study where they tried to differentiate between if a kid was inclined to trust somebody who agreed with them and they were likely to take their answer as the truth because they agreed versus like they knew that person was right, was correct.
Yeah, so in the specific study here, I'm not sure that they asked kids to explain their decisions. Also, I think we want to take these results with a slight grain of salt, which is we can't assume that kids believe that is the truth or like that's the real word, right? It's really what are the kids' best guesses for what this object is called. Yeah. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I'm going to move forward. The other thing to highlight is that the studies I presented today are not my own studies. They are studies from the literature, from a lot of other great scientists that I found to use as examples here. But what I want to talk about next is kind of where do we go from here, right? So I've talked to you about 2 parts today, thinking like a baby, what knowledge do we start off with, and how do we learn like a child? What are those learning mechanisms like? And here's a quote that I want to show you from Alan Turing, who was a famous computer scientist interested in human intelligence. And this is what he said 50 years ago, right? So he said, presumably the child brain is something like a notebook as one buys it from the stationers. Rather little mechanism, lots of blank sheets. And then he proceeded to say, our hope is that there's so little mechanism in the child brain that something like it could be easily programmed. And that's because he wanted to create intelligent computers and machines that could learn and think just like we do, right? And he was thinking that, adults have a lot of experience. I don't know how to put that in a computer. Maybe we can look at babies and young children and put that in, and then just kind of let them learn from experience in the world. Hopefully what I've shown you today is that, there's quite a bit of mechanism going on very early on, and there's not too many blank sheets. I'm sure there's a lot waiting for the world to implement, but we also start with quite a few basic set of knowledge and beliefs about the world. Now, I do think that Turing had a very great attitude towards this, which is that if we could learn more about how kids and babies think and reason, we could really start applying that to maybe more practical applications, whether it's in machine intelligence and then so on. And those kinds of interactions are starting to happen in the last 5 years. So I think it's a very exciting time for all of us. So the third part, what's next in developmental research? What I'd like to talk about is a bit more the practical aspects of doing research with young children. So I've told you examples whereby the diversity of evidence matters for how far we can generalize, right? So if we have only a Dalmatian being called a Dachs, we can't really say much about other kinds of animals. But if we have lots of different examples, then we can say more broadly about these categories. And that's really true for any kind of research, right? In order to say that our findings generalize across all humans, we really need to have a diverse sample. So we have some issues with that. There are some challenges in generalizing our research that I just want to put on the table. So it is hard to get participants in. There are small participant pools. A lot of these studies in the old days, were done by calling up families that were from the neighborhood and inviting them to come to the university lab, visit for an hour, and show them these shows and so on. But that's pretty hard because you can imagine only some families can do that, and not everyone has the time or energy to spend, right? There's also limited diversity of participation, so you can imagine that you might want to live close enough to university in order to be able to visit it. But if you live somewhere that's not really represented with a school that's doing this kind of research, then those families are not being represented. It's also difficult to conduct repeated studies of the same children. And this is really important when we are interested in development and learning, because we want to know if the same kinds of knowledge, how does that develop within a child over time, right? And it can be quite difficult to get families to come in every month or every year and tell a child, hey, I want to study what you know about the world, but I want to follow you for 10 years. It's hard to get people to agree to that. It's hard to make that actually happen, right? And these challenges further, they amplify when we study special populations. So whether it's children with learning disabilities or other kinds of special issues, this is a really big challenge because arguably that's where our research might have the greatest impact, right? That's maybe where we want to really try to improve their experiences. So what can we do? How can we reach the greater public? How can we go beyond perhaps just the families that we encounter at the university campus? Well, recently, really the last 5 or 10 years, we've really tried to extend these efforts, and I'd like to tell you about 3 kinds of solutions today. And these are ways in which you might get to participate in them as well. It's really starting to engage the broader audience. So the first kind of solution is just doing outreach. Instead of staying in our labs all day, we're going to go out to the world, and we're going to recruit families. So if you've ever been to the Museum of Science or the Boston Children's Museum in the last 10 years, you might have seen some of this happen. So it's called a living laboratory, whereby we place research staff into the museums, and families can just participate in these brief activities, 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. And now there's over 30 sites in the US. It started at the Museum of Science in Boston, and it's gone all over the country, and also some in Canada and other countries as well. So this is really cool because we get a broader diversity of participation. If you're interested, you can go to their website, livinglab.org. It's put on your handout. They have some activities and videos of these kinds of games. Now, we can also use the internet and conduct research online. So at our lab, we've started this website called lookit.mit.edu, whereby instead of visiting the lab with your baby, you can just sit at home, and we're going to put videos on the computer for you and use your webcam to record a video of what the baby is looking at. And what this enables us to do is really reach everyone in the country, right, all around the world. So we did a comparison. Our lab has been doing research at the Boston Children's Museum for about 10 years now, and we compared the diversity in terms of parent education with that of the broader U.S. Population, which is from the census data. So in the U.S., we've got maybe 50% of parents that have high school education and 50% that go beyond. At the Boston Children's Museum, when we survey parents who participate in our studies, almost all of them have college experience or more. So that's really a skewed sample, right? We can't really say something about all kids if we're only studying some of them. Now what we've done is to repeat some of the same studies online over the internet and compare the diversity in terms of parental education. And this is what we found on our website, Look It, is it really starts to look a bit more representative of the broader US population. So that's really encouraging for us. We feel like we are kind of getting a more representative sample, and we're looking for ways to expand this kind of reach.
Have you seen differences in the results? Have you tried to replicate your original data with that?
Yeah, we have. So there are no differences. They look pretty consistent. We did the purple versus green study exactly, and we found basically the same results. Yeah. Okay. We currently have several studies, so if you want to try it out, you can go online. I'm currently doing a longitudinal study in which babies can participate in child sessions. So they watch those surprising videos of trucks not falling or balls going through walls. And we pay families to participate in these. It's really fun and quick. And here are some other examples. You can do research over Skype and kind of video chat with an experimenter and a baby without going to the lab. We also have studies of motor learning in infants. So getting parents to maybe record a video of how their babies are learning to do particular kinds of actions. So these are other examples where you might want to try participating. And the third solution, talking about generalization, is to do collaborative research at scale. So this means going to other countries all around the world. And one example of this is called the Many Babies Collaborative, because they're literally studying as many babies as they can. So instead of studying 20, 30, 40 babies in one study, they're going to have like 2,000 babies doing the same task. Then we can really look at questions about individual differences, or differences across language, and so on. So this spans 6 continents and 30 countries, and they're just starting to color some of the results. So it's really exciting. Now the final example I want to show you about, I think is really important because it starts to be an application kind of issue. So this is a research consortium called the Autism Baby Siblings Research Consortium. And what they do is, autism is kind of this situation in which children pay less attention to social cues, and as a result of that, it might impair a lot of social reasoning and also language learning and other abilities. In the US, about 1 in 40 kids have autism, but only 70% of them get treatment. And one issue preventing treatment is it's hard to diagnose. So currently, doctors can kind of diagnose autism signs at about 2 or 3 years of age. But if we want to go earlier, what they're trying to do is they're studying the behavioral and the brain markers, so they're scanning the brains of these babies to figure out, can we look for signs of autism even earlier than 2 years old? And they've been able to do that, so they're able to predict autism diagnosis by 1 year old, and that's really helpful because then you can do earlier intervention and so on. So I think that's a really promising kind of positive impact that our field has tried to do for the role, and really we look forward to more examples like this. So that brings me to the end of the talk. What can children teach us about the nature of human intelligence? And there are several examples here, just some pictures to remind you. It seems like human intelligence begins in babies with some basic building blocks, right? And then maybe those get combined or expanded in childhood through very active exploration that happens in pretty logical ways. And by studying more infants across the world, we can look at these more differences and how universal they all are and try to apply these results to education, to maybe artificial intelligence, and so on. So hopefully, I really enjoyed giving this lecture with you today. I hope you've learned some things and are curious to find out more about this field. So I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. And thank you.
Yeah, so what does, like, if they're able to find signs of autism, like, maybe at 1 year old, as opposed to, like, what does that mean for the child? Like, how much of a difference would that make for the child's later development?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't think we know the answers to that yet because at least this finding came out in the last 2 years. So those babies are just 3 years old right now, right? They're not even older. But what we can do we can apply those interventions a bit earlier. So maybe we can teach them certain ways of interacting with the role. We can see how to direct their attention to these things, and maybe just interact them with different ways that are better for their learning. Yeah. So stay tuned is the answer.
So this is actually somewhat prompted by one of the Science by the Pint seminars that they did recently on brain development and the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. And I was just curious if you've done any work or if you're familiar with maybe differences in the results of these when compared with maybe children who have a higher ACE score or maybe other interesting correlations like demographics or socioeconomic status, but especially with like, I guess, executive function or attention versus abuse or trauma.
Right. So unfortunately, I'm not the best person to answer that question. I tend to study topics, and these are examples that are more like what's maybe universal across all of us. So we do typically study typically developing children. I do think with regards to that issue, the one comment that I get from reading these things and taking some classes is kids are very resilient. And so, if you've had different experiences, whether it's traumatic or other kinds of stressors, you might have a different way of interacting with the world in order to perhaps either protect yourself or just you're a bit more risk aware. But I think that kids are very resilient and that they do figure those things out. And we should be aware of that and we should keep studying it so we can interact with them in different ways. But I don't think, at least a lot of the very basic knowledge about the world are probably going to stay the same.
I guess I'm curious if that would be a good way to determine whether that truly translates is to try replicating that with those different populations. For example, they were talking specifically about like startle reflex. Like the most, that's something you think would be very innate, but they were saying you can see marked differences in children who've had, and some of the things that would be considered adverse or kind of surprising. They said even at that level, you can see differences. So it seems like it would be worth attempting to replicate.
Yeah, so I do think it's promising there. So maybe some of the work that relies on taking information from other individuals would be interesting to look at those differences there. Yeah.
So you have been teaching us about how the babies learn, or the 2, 3 years old learn about this, all the studies you are doing. But beside all these, everything you learn about how the babies learn to understand things, is there anything more, not only about learning, but about happiness of the babies? So we can learn how to have happy kids, which can help to happy adulthood and less drugs, less suicide, or depression. So can we, are you guys doing something so we can go in the right direction?
Yeah. So me personally, I'm not doing research on that. I think that's a very important work. There are a lot of people who are doing those kinds of research, maybe like looking at teenagers and what factors lead to addiction or other kinds of less positive behaviors. Our lab doesn't study that, unfortunately, although it'd be interesting to see. I do think, however, that some of these ideas can be applied. So what I've shown you is that children are kind of considering evidence in a very rational way, right? And they kind of learn depending on what they already expect about the world and what kind of evidence you're showing them. So maybe if you wanted to change the behavior of somebody, you might want to start by understanding what is your current theory about the world, and then that can help you decide what kinds of evidence would really change their minds in a way that makes sense. Yeah. So I think there may be opportunities to try to link some of that. So there's work on like decision making in kids, what kinds of factors do they consider, But no, those are really important questions, very practical ones. And it's kind of sad that, on one hand, you want to do basic science research that tries to uncover some of these basic ideas about how the mind works, and on the other hand, you want to also have people who are trying to apply that to make a real difference. Yeah, thanks for that question.
So would you say like kids, like, because you said children consider ethics in like more rational ways, do you think they consider things in more rational ways than how they would like feel about a certain object or a certain situation? Like they'd rather take a more rational approach than how they actually feel about it?
Mm-hmm. Could you maybe give an example about feeling about an object?
Like if you were to like, but I guess if you took like one of the experiments that you did, like for example, like the green and purple person,
Sure.
and how they had like, different answers for each object.
Yeah.
Do you think like babies or children are more apt to make decisions because of like prior knowledge and what they know or what they know to be more rational than how they might like instead of the child making a decision like, oh, I'm gonna go with the purple person because I like the color purple, so I'm gonna choose what the purple person has to say.
Yeah.
Or do you think they'd be like, oh, I'm gonna go with the purple person because what they're saying is actually correct?
Yeah. So in like these specific examples that I've used today, we try to basically control for those other kinds of factors that they didn't want to study, right? So when you do an experiment, you always want to be able to randomize all the other things, whether it's feelings that day or mood or any other kinds of experiences, relative to the question you want to study, which is like, does accuracy matter or not? Or do you think that emotions are going to come into the picture, right? Who we decide to trust, what we decide to do, it's going to depend on our mood on that day. It's going to depend on whether we've had positive or negative experiences with those people that day. So again, I don't know a specific example off the top of my head that has tried to like comparables of those things. But I do know one example where like if one person had just helped the child with another problem before they went into this task, that's going to affect how likely that the kids are going to pay attention. And you kind of see this even in your everyday interactions. So before we do a study with a child, we always try to get familiarized with them. So we ask them what's their name, how old are they, and until they feel comfortable with us, right? Before we start going through the room and asking them all these questions. So I'm sure that does play a role, and we do like consider that in the back of our minds. But I unfortunately can't pull up a specific example right now. Yeah. Thanks. Okay. All right. Yeah. Thanks so much for your attention and time today.